So I love me some Lexus, but if I'm honest, it's an IS 500 or an LC 500 convertible. But those, sadly, don't pay the bills at Lexus. Instead, that is the job of the RX. And there, it is completely new. Okay, so let's get something out of the way right at the top. The new RX looks a hell of a lot like the old RX, at least in terms of silhouette and the execution of daylight opening, but it is indeed an all-new vehicle, and that is evidenced by what's underneath the hood. And there, let's just say there's a little bit of old, and there's something very new we've never seen before in anything remotely related to an RX. But before we get to that, let's start with the familiar flavors of RX. And there, I've got some sad news for you. There's no longer a V6, but you kind of saw that coming because the world, electrification, efficiency, you know the whole drill here. So let's start with the basic version, and that is now a 2.4 turbo. We've seen this in the NX, 275 horsepower and 317 pound-feet of torque. That is mated to a real geared transmission. In this case, it would be an 8-speed. Then we move on to a hybrid, not a plug-in hybrid, a hybrid. That's a 2.5 inline-4 gasoline, no turbocharger. That is mated to a CVT. They're 246 horsepower and 233 pound-feet of torque. Now there is going to be a plug-in hybrid. I'm assuming they're going to call it an RX 450h. However, they haven't given me any details on that one. Then we press on to what is absolutely changed here, and that is a performance version of an RX. If you look at the previous, F versions of the RX, it was really just dressed up. It was like a gussied up RX. It was more like the wheels look prettier, different color or trim on the inside. This takes that 2.4 turbo and it changes to a hybrid, but not a parallel hybrid like we see in a Prius, where it's two different electric motors that's connected to the side of the engine and then running through a CVT. This is borrowing the technology from, and I told you this would happen, Mike Swears and the Tundra. So there is an electric motor that sits between the gas engine and a real geared transmission, like the Tundra or the Sequoia. But why is that important? Answer, it's not about the fuel economy. So if we step back to the 2.4 turbo front-wheel drive entry-level RX, 24 mpg combined. The hybrid all-wheel drive, not a plug-in, 33 mpg combined. This, the RX 500h, 26 mpg combined. And to further illustrate that point, all-wheel drive systems. But here we have to kind of go backwards to the basic hybrid. That is only on offer as all-wheel drive, where the basic model, the 350 with a turbo engine, that can be had as all-wheel drive or front-wheel drive. But in the hybrid, that one is an electric all-wheel drive. So there is no drive shaft from the gas engine to the rear wheels, kind of like the Toyota Venza. This, it's got an electric motor in the back. There is no drive shaft, but it's not really related to the Venza. This is more related to like a Porsche Taycan, because in the back, it's got an electric motor like this size with an inverter, much like a full electric vehicle. So the concept here is to send more torque to the rear wheels. Now, I spoke with one of the engineers, and he clearly was told, don't give too much information about what we're doing in terms of the tuning or how much torque we're going to send. But from what I understand, it can send more than 50% of the torque to the rear wheels. So think of this all-wheel drive application as more mission critical rather than situational awareness. Like take that hybrid, for example, the one that's based off the Venza system. That's looking to send torque to the rear wheels when there's loss of traction, inclement weather, that kind of stuff. This, on the other hand, is all about bullets and numbers. Like take that front-wheel drive basic 2.4 turbo. That has a 0 to 60 of 7.5 seconds. Nothing to write home about. This, not an IS 500 or an LC 500, but it's down to 5.9 seconds. And think about the size of the vehicle. They've actually changed that. This is not exactly a small vehicle. It's like a mid-size crossover. So they've shortened the vehicle by 2.36 inches. However, you got to pay the piper somewhere. The wheelbase, that increases by 2.36 inches. So the total length there, 112.2. Inside, we revert back to the theme of the familiar, but not the old RX, rather the new NX. Remember when we drove that car in Arizona? We saw Sugasan's new theme, where he took a screen but made it work inside of the dashboard of what you'd expect in a car. So like the EQS, for example. Lovely screen that goes from A-pillar to A-pillar, but it's a horrific UX because it's all haptic feedback on glass. Great for an iPad, great for a phone, but not for a vehicle you're driving down the road. So what Sugasan has done here, he's added actual real knobs, real buttons on the console. Like for example, I can adjust the temperature on either side, or I can adjust the volume. And then this also adopts the new Toyota corporate UX system, which I would go so far as to saying is probably one of the top 5 out there right now, because it's so simple. It has a very simple like 0-layer concept where the basic layer is the map, and then it has the applications off to the side. So it's kind of like a Mac OS where you have all of the menus in the same place in every application. Then we can go in and see different things. Like in this case, I can change the drive modes. I'm actually trying to look at this to see if we get something new that they haven't told us from Lexus, but all we're getting is normal, sport, eco, and custom. Now this is the point of the UX where we'd also see an EV mode in that coming plug-in hybrid. Now for the avoidance of doubt, this RX 500h, not a plug-in hybrid. This is a performance hybrid. So think of it as like a Porsche Panamera Turbo SE hybrid if Lexus made it. I know I'm going too far down the Porsche path here. Then there's the tactile feel here. This one is the fancy one. I expect this car to be the better part of like 75,000, 80,000 US. So it's got different tactile feel. Like for example, it's got faux suede on the inserts of the dash. And then notice this one's got the two-tone red, black leather. Nice touch. I'd like to see this to be actually red suede. That would really pop in here. Overall, a lovely place to be, if not familiar. And so we arrive at that point, design. Now, I read the comments. I see that most of you, not huge fans of the design direction of Lexus. Me personally, I love the LC 500, arguably one of the most beautiful designs, bar none. And yes, I like the new IS 500, and yes, I do like the grills of those cars. This, kind of a different direction. This, they really couldn't change much because this is the vehicle that pays the freight at Lexus. Like for example, the first generation, which invented this whole segment of a crossover that's a luxury, they sold like 400,000 of them. Most people didn't think that car should even exist, yet it became a rock star and everybody else started to copy it. Now they gotta change a couple of things on a smaller scale. Like look at the taillight treatment here. It cleans up the rear end while bringing all of it together. Then we get to the side here. We talked about the silhouette, but really the daylight opening, this is where you look at it and say, is it even different? When I first saw this thing in person, I'm like, that looks like a heavy refresh, not a totally new vehicle. And I had to go to one of the engineers and said, what did you change? Turns out some of the platform stuff, and they had to do that more for lightweighting. They took 200 pounds out of the car. And so we arrive at the challenging point of our discussion on design, that schnoz. If you ask me, that is a nose only a mother can love. And it's not just the nose, it's the nose working in conjunction with the hood. Take a look at the hood line here. That's where it naturally should be, but it looks like there's been some additional clay plopped on top of the hood where it looks like there's too much weight here. It isn't balanced with the overall vehicle design. But then you look at the grille, and yeah, they've added some dimension to it, but only from the plan view, looking at it from the top, where in the front it's like a wall of grille. And then think about a Honda Accord, a current generation Honda Accord. The top of the schnoz on those things, it's almost identical here, and that should not be the case on a Lexus. So overall, the design, it's an RX, but I think where they tried to get aggressive is in the wrong place, and that brings us to the wish list. So at least at this point of the wish list, an open letter to Sugasan. Perhaps we could clean this up, add some more organic dimension. Now let's focus on the items we can change. If I'm reading the tea leaves correctly with the RX 500h, Lexus is still kind of leaving their option open on what it's trying to be. Is it trying to be like a regular hybrid that is a little bit more sporty, Or is it trying to be a real performance vehicle? You may remember in our ES Hybrid episode, like what, 3 years ago, I presented the idea of, hey, how about a front-wheel drive vehicle with a V6 engine if the GS is going away, but then put a real electric motor in the back of that vehicle to make it drive like a performance rear-wheel drive vehicle. And I was thinking like M550-esque kind of vehicle. Well, apparently someone was listening to that episode and they took the idea, at least stole my idea, and put it in the RX 500H. So what am I trying to say here? Let's play it all the way through and make it a real performance vehicle, meaning let's have the option of a primarily rear-wheel drive mode, at least, where the hybrid system is going, but we get the torque and the performance of, say, like a mid-size BMW crossover rather than an RX, and that would differentiate this from the lower-priced RXs. But this is just one man's opinion, and this is the point of the episode where I turn this around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, while we're here, I have to show you a couple things. Okay, so the obvious question, what is this place that we've been filming in? The answer, this is Toyota Lexus headquarters in Plano, Texas. So that would mean they have a heritage collection here. So they have things like the first ever RX Hybrid, which technically is the second generation of RX, and here is the first ever generation of RX. But you and I don't want to see baby buggies. We've already talked about that enough. We want to see things like that, the Toyota 2000 GT. This was a real sports car, but the interesting thing today about this is it is a quintessential classic car that is accepted by the classic car hobby for years and years and years. Even after being a Bond car, it was worth $200,000. Sounds like a lot of money, but when you look at all the other cars from this era, they're like $1 million plus at the same time. Then there was one collector in Los Angeles that said, you know what, that is not correct. And he went to Monterey one year and bought one of these things for $600,000. And then everybody woke up and like, wait a minute, these things have been underpriced. Now they're worth $1 million each. There are 2 of them sitting here in this collection. Then we come over here. This is the stunning, the first really beautiful Lexus, the SC400. This car was shaped with balloons. They would put water in balloons to shape this vehicle. Achingly beautiful. I would argue neck and neck with the LC500. GS, this, believe it or not, was based on a Jaguar design. And then we press on to the vehicle that actually gave birth to Lexus. This one, 2 very interesting tidbits about it. Number 1, remember the first Lexus ISF? Its chief engineer was Yaguchi-san, major track rat, the guy knows how to shoe, but he was also the chief engineer of the first ever Lexus. So he goes from making super quiet cars to making the most ridiculous Lexus that ever came about and gave birth to the F brand. Now this specific car here, it's not just related to Toyota and Lexus. This one came out of the Brumos collection. If you've been watching my show, you know exactly what that is. This car used to be owned by Hurley Haywood, the most winning long-distance race car driver in the world, and also a Porsche aficionado. So yes, I brought together Porsche and Lexus in the same episode. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.